All right, let's take a look at what you're going to learn in this course. We're going to first of all talk about the differences between web and desktop development and mobile app development. Then we'll take a look at Xcode, the IDE that's required to build apps for iOS, and Objective-C, the extensions to the C language that are also required for iOS development. iOS development uses a number of libraries, in this case that are called frameworks, and we'll look into all of those so that you can understand how to build controls that go on the screen, as well as access things like location services or interact with the social networking features of iOS. We'll take a look at some of the more advanced features, such as accessing web services or making your iOS device an actual web server of its own. And last but not least, we'll talk about how to ship your app to your users. When we're talking about Xcode and Objective-C, we'll talk about how to acquire and install Xcode from the Mac App Store. And we'll go through looking at Objective-C from the point of view of someone who, like you, has probably used scripting languages such as JavaScript and Ruby primarily, and will understand what are the primary differences there and how to express the common idioms that you know how to do in your current languages in Objective-C. As far as frameworks are concerned, most of the framework in iOS is built into a single thing called UIKit. That's everything from things like UI View, which is the equivalent of a page in other kinds of applications, to things like UI Table View, which are scrolling tables, UI Navigation Controller, which allows you to do nested things that you see, for example, in the Settings app in iOS, and tab bar controllers and toolbar controllers. We'll talk about debugging. We'll talk about how to use the free iOS simulator that's included with Xcode. And more importantly, we'll talk about how to debug on a device, which requires you to sign up for the Apple iOS Developer Program and get specific certificates in order to be able to validate your application in the iOS sandbox. And finally, we'll talk about how to ship it. It's one thing to have development certificates, but in order to ship, you also have to have a distribution certificate, and you have to prepare your app for distribution. It involves some settings in the setup of your app in Xcode, and also the creation of descriptions and keywords, which is the kind of things that you see inside the iOS App Store. And finally, we'll briefly talk about the review process so you understand what happens after you say you're done until Apple says the app's ready for sale. And last but not least, we'll take a look at the vibrant developer communities. As an iOS developer, you're not alone. You can use the Apple Developer Forums once you've registered with Apple, and there's tons and tons of answers for every question you can imagine available on Stack Overflow, as well as copious amounts of great example code and libraries that you can reuse available on places like GitHub. So let's get started.